Today I'm going to show you how to make a cherry flavor for cherry soda because cherry is a wildly popular flavor. You'll find it in black cherry sodas, cherry Coke, and Dr. Pepper. And Dr. Pepper is in fact a cherry-based soda. And I will be doing a couple of videos on it, the next two videos. But to understand why Dr. Pepper tastes the way it does, you need to really understand cherry soda. Now this recipe is slightly different. It's not as complex as the Dr. Pepper one, but it's a good starting point. And I've written up this whole formula sheet for you. Includes all the steps and the ingredients on how to make it, and you can find it over on Patreon. But to really understand cherry flavor, we really need to go back to the 1800s and look at history. And specifically, a cordial called Cherry Bounce. And most people have probably heard of this. It's quite popular. Been popular for a long time, and for a good reason. Now, Cherry Bounce, when they made it, they would take cherries, and I don't have cherries because they're out of season right now, so we're gonna use a plum. Just use your imagination. But to make Cherry Bounce, they used to, crush plum or cherries and the stones, and it was important that they crush the stones and then macerate that in copious amounts of alcohol with clove, nutmeg, sometimes mace, and cinnamon. And that was the base flavor for Cherry Bounce. Now, one of the things when you crush the stones of a cherry, it releases benzaldehyde, which is a pretty common flavor. Everybody knows it kind of as almond extract or marzipan, but it also releases cyanide. So that's where the almond flavor comes from. It's naturally found in cherry stones. Now, Cherry Bounce, the original Cherry Bounce in the 1600s, would have been more bitter because of the cyanide, but it also probably had a better effect at giving a person a high because cyanide creates hypoxia. It prevents cells from absorbing oxygen. And that can make you feel euphoric. And with the copious amounts of alcohol, it was added to it. So pilots have to deal with hypoxia if they go too high without supplemental oxygen. It would have been a fun drink to have, but a horrible hangover. The point is that benzaldehyde is actually found in the stones of the cherries. So that's an important element of cherry flavor, not just the fruity esters. So a fresh cherry, if you're just eating the flesh of it, has an estery element. So that comes in the 1850s when they discovered esters or ethers, and they started producing these ethers to give a fruity flavor. What you'll find if you go through the history books from kind of the 1700s all the way up into the soda fountains, like the peak period of soda fountains in the 1880s and 1890s. And Dr. Pepper was invented kind of in the 1880s, but it was based on cherry soda, which had already existed. But what you'll find is that the combination of Cherry Bounce and the formula for the fruity esters for cherry merged. And so you'll have the cinnamon and clove is still found in the formula, which really it's not really found in cherries, but because of that Cherry Bounce influence, it is today. But then you'll also find some fruity esters, and we'll talk about these when we get into the formulation. And today we're just using 2 esters, but the actual Dr. Pepper formula has 9 different esters in it because it does say 23 ingredients, and 9 of them, or at least the formula I have, has 9 esters in it. And that just kind of gives that fruity element. So this combination of history merging together at the peak of the soda fountain, the 1880s and 1890s, creates what we know as the cherry flavor for cherry sodas today. Now, when you mix all this together, again, it's only 8 ingredients. Anybody can do this. The price actually works out to about 4 cents Canadian or 3 cents US per 355 mils, so single can. So 1 bottle of this, which 27 mils, is going to make 1,500 liters of soda when you mix it with some simple syrup, some solvent, a little glycerin, and some caramel coloring, and if you want, red coloring. But it really isn't that complicated. But this smells fantastic. I made this up a week ago, and you do have to age these a little bit. It kind of smells cherryish, or the association of cherry, not fresh fruit, but the cherry soda. So when you make this, it is quite, relatively easy. It's 4 steps. So let me show you how to do that. So the first step to making a cherry flavor is to make what's called a cherry oil. And it has 8 ingredients. Again, you can find this over on Patreon, but you're literally just going to mix these 8 ingredients. So let's go through them and I'll explain what they are. Now, benzaldehyde is the key kind of that almond extract flavor or from cherry stones. It's just not found in almonds, but it is the cherry flavor from the stone. And that gives you that classic almondy flavor. Now the next ingredient, and this is in the cherry oil element, is isoamyl acetate. You'll know this as banana oil, and I did a video on making banana flavor. This is one of the ingredients. Now this has obviously a banana flavor, but when mixed with the other ingredients, if you're not looking for it, it just comes across as kind of fruity ester. And they probably used isoamyl acetate because it was cheap, readily available back then. But when you're formulating, you can switch out to any esters you want, and that's basically what Dr. Pepper seems to have done, or at least these more complex cherry soda formulas I have, is they expanded the number of esters to give it more natural fruitiness as opposed to just being a single compound or 2 compounds. So when you're looking at this formula, this is the #1 ester, and in the cherry oil, it's actually used more of this than benzaldehyde. But in the second step, we actually add more benzaldehyde, so this one comes out as the primary flavor. But this makes up 10 grams of your 27 grams of cherry oil. So it is something that really does give the fruitiness. Now there's another ester called amyl benzoate, and this one we use 5 grams. So these 2 esters make up half of your cherry oil. And this one doesn't smell particularly like it does have that kind of almondy, hard to describe. But if you don't have amyl benzoate, you can use ethyl benzoate or methyl benzoate. You can mix these up. This one is harder to find, but you can use ethyl benzoate, and ethyl benzoate is used in the Dr. Pepper formula. Though a little bit of this is still used in that formula. Then the rest is basically essential oils and vanillin, but you'll just use some lemon oil. And again, this is gonna give some fruitiness, and we'll also have some clove bud oil. This gives spiciness. We'll also have some orange oil, again, with lemon oil, kind of creates that fruity nature, and cinnamon, which cinnamon and clove are the 2 from the Cherry Bounce recipes. And then vanillin, because it seems to find its way into everything, but that's just going to give kind of that more pleasant flavor. What you'll do is you're going to just mix these all together according to each amount. So I won't go through the process with you just because it's basically weigh them all out into a beaker, stir them until the vanillin's dissolved, and then put it in a bottle. And then you have to allow this to age for at least a week. It just allows things to become equally distributed. There's not really a lot of chemical reactions, if any, going on in this, but it basically disperses everything so it becomes a uniform flavor, and that takes time. But once you have your cherry oil put together, the next step is to make a basically cherry flavor concentrate. Now, I've broken down the formula. Again, this bottle will flavor 1,500 liters of soda. So it's a massive amount. And again, the price is really low. So I've made this into the smallest unit possible, which is 375 mils of vodka. You use whatever vodka you want, but you're basically going to take out about 30 mils. This is a 750 mil bottle, or 375 mil bottle. You're gonna take out about 25 mils because we're going to replace it with some of the flavor compounds and a little bit of glycerin. So glycerin just kind of helps the flavor blend together and give it some, I don't want to say texture, but it's probably kind of mouthfeel to it. And then you can use caramel coloring. This just gives it that dark color that is associated with these cherry sodas. And historically, they used a lot of red dye in this. So the recipe actually calls for almost half the amount of alcohol to be a red dye alcohol. And that red dye was red dye number 3 back in the 1950s where I found this recipe, and we don't use number 3 anymore. So I'm leaving the red dye out You can make this actually clear. You don't even need the caramel coloring. If you want to make a clear soda, this is a thing of Crystal Pepsi, which is something I'm working on. But you'd end up with something like this, where it's just a clear cherry soda. You can color it any way you want. You can buy food dyes and stuff, approved ones, and just follow the instructions. So you can do it any way you want. I'm just leaving out the red dye because the caramel coloring is enough for me. And you really want really, really dark caramel coloring, because once it's in this bottle, this is all you're going to use to flavor the simple syrup. And then after that, you're just going to use the simple syrup to flavor a soda. So let's assemble this. Now to assemble this, it's fairly easy. You're just going to combine stuff. The one thing I do recommend is pouring off some of the alcohol, not like in the first step where I just remove some, but this is just going to be to rinse out the beaker, because glycerin, caramel, very sticky, so you'll want something to wash these beakers out. So the first step I'm going to do is basically tare my balance, and I'm going to weigh out 2.25 grams of the cherry oil. And it does smell fantastic. Like, it's one of those things, when you make it, you're going to be, fairly impressed with the aroma. It's spicy and pleasant, so it really does have that fruitiness. Now the next step is to tare, and then we're going to add some more benzaldehyde, because again, this is the primary flavor. And we're going to add 3 grams of this. So that's 3.01 grams. That will be perfectly fine. And at this point, I would recommend just kind of pouring the most of this into your alcohol, and then just giving a little rinse with some of the reserved alcohol, because that's the way you're going to capture pretty much all of it, all the flavor. Then you can just use this beaker, and what we're going to do is weigh out some glycerin, and we need 15 grams of glycerin. And if you go a little bit over, that's fine. Glycerin's not going to contribute to the flavor. It's just, again, a mouthfeel thing. And then we need some caramel coloring. Now this calls for 6 grams. You can use more, you can use less. It really depends on the color of it. And this is the darkest stuff I have. So we need 6 grams. Now the one thing caramel coloring does is it can help emulsify. There's an old patent from Pepsi about emulsifying with caramel. I will eventually get to that, but what I'd recommend is just pouring this right into here. Getting as much of it out as possible, and then rinsing with some of the alcohol. And this will just make sure you capture everything. And then we're back up to our level. Now, you can put this on a stir plate. You can drop a magnetic stir in there and stir it. You do want to combine this as much as possible. You can just shake it. It will kind of get in there, but I do recommend kind of stirring it on a stir plate. So basically, you're just going to shake this up and unify it. I mean, you really do want to shake it up as much as possible. But the level of organic flavor compounds should dissolve in 40% alcohol just fine. So I'm just going to let this stir for 5 minutes. So the next step after this is to take some of this and put it into some simple syrup. Now simple syrup, you can use whichever one you want. I use 3 parts sugar to 2 parts water, because that was used at the soda fountains. It just tends to make mixing easier. If you want a sweeter version, you can use 2 to 1. If you want less sweet, you can use 1 to 1. And if you're so inclined, you can use the 0-calorie simple syrup recipe that I made before. I'll link it up here. So let's give this a few minutes to stir and combine and all come together, and then we'll work on the soda syrup. Now to make your flavor syrup, you're just going to use 16 grams of this. So just tare your balance and weigh out 16 grams. Now ideally you would let this sit for a couple days. That's the recommendation, but just because this is a video and I'm making things pretty much on the fly. You're gonna take your 16 grams and you're just going to add it to your simple syrup and then mix this up. Now this is pretty light in color, so you can add more caramel coloring as you see fit. I don't think my caramel coloring's the commercial strength. So if you need to add more caramel coloring, that is fine. But again, I'm not too concerned about actually having it a dyed color. Again, in the actual recipe, they call for a tremendous amount of red dye, and then the caramel coloring just gives it a dark tint. So, but for me, this is going to work just fine. And the last thing we need to do is you can add basically 12 grams of malic acid to your simple syrup, or you can add citric acid if you don't have malic acid. Malic acid's kind of that typical cherry flavor. So let's add a little bit of that. And that is your syrup. Always add the acid at the end. Acid can interfere with the way flavors dissolve in, but once the flavors are basically dissolved throughout the syrup, then add the acid. That's just a good formulation trick for anybody new to this. But there you go. That is actually cherry soda flavor. The only thing you do to make a cherry soda would be take 2 ounces of this, add it to a 12-ounce glass, and then top up with soda water. And that will give you your cherry flavor. Now, obviously, this isn't fully mixed, but let's see what it comes out to taste like. Yeah, it does have a cherry flavor. Like, there's no doubt about it. The acid's kind of very low. You can add more if you want, but I do find it tangy, and it does have that fruity cherry element to it. If you're running a bar, a restaurant, a soda fountain, if you're not making your own stuff, I highly recommend it because you can really adjust this in so many different ways. This is shelf stable. It's basically now flavored vodka, highly flavored vodka. And you can keep this on a shelf for months, years, and typically they actually do get better with a certain amount of aging. So you now have this delicious syrup to put in beverages and make sodas. And again, you can increase the flavor if you want. So when you do the math on this, the amount of benzaldehyde in the finished drink is about 27 parts per million. And typically the maximum amount they find used in beverages is around 36 parts per million. So you got roughly 10% more. So you could add 10% more of this flavor if you wanted something a little more punchy. Again, when we get into the Dr. Pepper recipe, we use a lot more esters. So you can actually remove the isoamyl acetate, though I find it quite, it does not taste like banana at all. It has that kind of fresh, spicy flavor. Malic acid seems to work. You'll find phosphoric acid and citric acid in various recipes, but malic acid does give a very pleasant cherry associative tang. So this is the way you want to do it. And I've pretty much done this in real time. This is, other than the aging part of making the cherry oil, everything I put together has been in, whatever it takes me to make this video. So this part here, you should age for a couple days before using it. And then you should, mix this a little more thoroughly than I did. But again, I'm making a video, not necessarily making product for final use. So do that. You'll get this, again, these make it really easy. All the instructions are here, all the ingredients and the amounts that are reasonable. And you can double the recipe and use the 750 ml bottle of vodka. But I find for my purposes, this is going to last more than a year for me. So that's how you make cherry soda. It does taste pretty good. This syrup has actually turned out better than I thought it would. I was always worried about this banana oil, but in reality, it just adds a fresh cherry ester flavor when combined with the other things. So give it a try if you're into this. But if you want the Dr. Pepper recipe, I'll be working on that in 2 parts. The first part is to go through the 23 or so ingredients in it, or in the formula that I have found. and then we will assemble it in a separate video because it's going to take a while to put it all together. So that's it for cherry soda. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.